the Florida Writer Podcast, a discussion about writing and other things.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Florida Writer Podcast with your host, Alison Nissen. And today I am lucky enough to be with Randee Dawn. Randee, could you give us a 60-second elevator pitch about who you are and what you write?
I certainly will. Thank you for having me, Alison. My name is Randee Dawn. I am a journalist, an entertainment journalist, and a novelist as of yesterday. My book, Tune In Tomorrow, came out. It is a funny, wacky, behind-the-scenes look at a fantastical reality TV show run by mythical creatures, for mythical creatures, but starring humans. So you can imagine what might go on behind the scenes there. We've got a little bit of murder mystery, maybe. We've got a bottomless pit. We've got a love triangle. Anything you can possibly want. It's a whole stew of craziness.
All right. That is really funny. My head went to like the puppy Super Bowl, when we have like, like right before the Super Bowl, they have the puppies and they try to see which one's going to win the race,
Right.
and because we humans are in charge, and then we put stories on top of these puppies about who could do what and why, and
Right.
their build and their shape and the breed that they might be. Although I think those are probably all golden retrievers, but nonetheless, like we as humans do that. So here we have mystical creatures doing that about humans, which is even funnier in my opinion. Like we're just right where my brain went. That's all I gotta say.
Exactly. Well, my idea with the story was that, we make all these movies, these Lord of the Ring movies, these Game of Thrones movies, and we are fascinated with dragons and fairies and orcs and castles and magic spells. And I thought, well, they wouldn't be interested in those things. That's commonplace for them. They'd be interested in things like embezzlements, adultery. Tell me about writing checks, the things that we find incredibly dull and boring. And having written for a soap opera magazine for a time, I initially thought, well, that's kind of a lot of the stuff they do on soap operas. And reality shows are kind of our soap operas, our modern soap operas. So it kind of all went together. Where are you going to find the day-to-day lives of humans portrayed in such a way that it would be fascinating to creatures that simply don't have to deal with that stuff?
It is amazing how reality television captures our attention.
I know. Well, the whole, a lot of reality TV. I mean, especially the OCU soaps, the occupational soaps, or the OCU-dramas. That's what it is, occupational docudrama type stuff. We graft onto stories that are very simple, but we get really into the characters. And that's really kind of what was the draw for soap operas for so many years, is that you get invested in these characters on a regular basis. You want to know what's happening in their daily lives. And some of it is aspirational, like, well, one of these days, maybe I will have a car like Bethany. But yeah, it's fascinating because we have a craving for ongoing stories that feel very personal. And we love all this other stuff. We can love all of our Squid Games, and we can love all of our Bridgertons and all of these other shows that really capture our imagination. But I think at core, we love the ongoing episodic drama.
Do you think that's one of the reasons of the rise of the series and the popularity of serial novels?
Yeah, I think not everybody's into that, clearly, but a lot of people love the idea that you have sort of this baseline of information. So when you start the second book in a series, or you start the second season in a series, you already know some stuff. So they don't have to reintroduce everybody. They don't have to reestablish all this information. You can just dive directly into story. And while the introduction of things and storylines and plot points is a lot of fun for a writer, and if you're doing it right, a lot of fun for a reader, it's nice to be able to open a book and know where you are when you start, and then just jump right into that story. We know who these people or these characters are. We kind of know a little bit about how they might behave. You might even have a carryover from the previous story, like, oh, wait a minute, we left off, but didn't resolve that thing. Is that thing going to resolve now? So yeah, I think that's some of the definitely some of the interest is there.
When we think about writing characters and creating that connection, it is easy to see where in a serial you can jump into the second or the third or the fourth without quite needing the same amount of background. But the idea of building those cliffhangers and keeping our audience on the edge of their seat, how have you been able to harness that in your novel?
Well, the actual title of the book is Tune In Tomorrow, which is the classic phrase that goes all the way back from the Perils of Pauline serials that people would watch in the movie theaters. You know, movie theaters used to have the feature, but then they would have shorts ahead of time in the news and everything. And they'd have a short of Perils of Pauline, and Pauline would be dangling off a cliff. And what will happen to Pauline? Tune in tomorrow, or tune in next week, or tune in. And, you know, it's a classic, it's marketing is what it really is. It says, come and find out what's going to happen next. And of course, then Pauline will be in some other dire situation in the next one, and you got to come back for that one. And so that's kind of what soap operas have used. That's what reality TV show uses. They do those cuts away from, you know, to commercial. And it's like, wait a minute, did she really say that thing? So in my book, I wanted to use that as an idea of telling you exactly what was going on in this TV show. It's a reality show / soap opera. It ties directly into Tune In Tomorrow. We have all sorts of chapter endings where you suddenly learn, wait a minute, there's a bottomless pit. Hey, wait a minute, she's going to actually go into the dragon's cave and do what? And it was just that it's more of an overall picture that I was trying to paint, as opposed to literally having a cliffhanger on every single chapter. But there's so much going on, and there's so many characters have so many different motivations that I'm hoping that each chapter propels you into the next chapter in a very natural way, which I think is what a lot of authors want to do anyway. They don't want. I've read lots of books, and I'm like, well, I'm just going to finish this chapter, and then I will put it down and go to bed. You get to the end of that chapter, and you're like, no, I have to just a page or two of the next one to see what happens. That's good writing, and with luck, that's kind of what I've done as well. Totally set aside from the reality show soap opera angle of all this.
So tell me about the very beginning. You had this idea of like, okay, these mythical creatures want to know what humans are doing. Yeah. Like, how did you sit down and say, okay, this is the topic. This is what I'm going to write.
Well, so there's a bunch of things coming into play here. Number one, I did write for a soap opera magazine for a long time. And I, at one point, had thought I should write murder mysteries that happen to take place on the soap opera set or something. Like, I just loved this whole camaraderie of the backstage of a TV show and how people become very, very familiar with one another. They become friends, they, all sorts of things like that. So I liked that, but I didn't do anything with it. I've also written a couple of other novels that have not been published, but they were more serious. They tended to be this contemporary urban fantasy, which is where you take fantastical creatures or situations, but you put them into a modern or contemporary context. So I've always liked that, but they were serious and they weren't selling. And my agent said to me, why don't you try something different? And I was like, okay, what could I do that's different? And at the same time, I had also been talking with this company called Choice of Games. Now, Choice of Games is a website you can go to where they have text-based sort of choose your own adventure stories. And the woman there said, give me a couple of pitches. What would you like to write about that you could do into this choose your own adventure story? And I came up with a basic idea for Tune In Tomorrow with a couple of the characters. And I threw it at her and she said, this is great, go with this. And then it turned out I was not really the right person to be writing this. It was too difficult to actually write all of the different possible adventures and everything. So I was able to take that story back and I thought, well, I've already got this plotted out. I mean, I'm not an outliner kind of person. There are people who outline, people who go by the seat of their pants. I'm more of a pantser. And I had this outline and I thought, well, I've got these characters. I've got this idea. I'm kind of passionate for the story. Let's see if I can do anything with this. I really didn't write funny before. I didn't even know if I could write funny. Maybe I would only write funny and I'd be the only one who'd think it was funny, which is always a risk. So that's where that story came from. The concept of mythics who watch human things, I think that has just been laying dormant with me for a long time. When I was in college, there was a cable access program on our campus. I went to Boston University and it was called Neighborhood Network News. And all of the pros, the people who were on camera, they were paid professional reporters and anchors. Everybody behind the scenes who did the crew, who did the camera work, who did the chyrons, those were all students. So I just kind of had that duality going on in the back of my head of that, and then also the mythics, and it just kind of all came together. It's not really just one idea that ever propels me or probably anybody else into writing a story, but a lot of things that kind of weave together.
You mentioned writing funny. How did you determine what might be funny, and how does that work? I mean, I consider myself a funny person, but I don't know if other people consider myself funny. And
Right.
When I write, I laugh, but I don't
Yeah.
know that other people laugh. So I totally feel you on that particular mission. So how did you achieve this? Did you start studying how to write comedy? I mean, what did you do in order to shore that funny bone up?
Right. Yeah, I think I'm hilarious personally. My style of humor is not exactly subtle necessarily. I love puns. I love slapsticky stuff. I'm a big Monty Python fan. It can be dry, but I don't think it's terribly subtle, the kind of stuff that I like. So that is most likely the kind of thing I'm going to write anyway. And I did take an improv class because my main character starts out in improv before she gets hired on this show, Tune In Tomorrow. And I wanted to know what that felt like. But in terms of studying, I don't know that I actually researched a lot of funny stuff. I just tried to write scenes. I sort of had an idea of how I wanted the scene to play. And then I would write it as funny as I knew how to, i.e. there would be funny names, or there'd be some strange circumstance in which the people meet. But then in the rewrites, what I actually would say to myself is, all right, you've got this scene. The scene works perfectly fine as a scene. How can you make it wackier? How can you make it more over the top? Because I'd already committed to the idea of this being an over the top, wacky sort of book. If you look at the cover, for example, the cover is loud. The cover is garish. There is neon on the cover. I am so happy with that, because that is exactly what I want you to think when you're going into this book. Once again, we are not doing subtle. So I would go back and I would write scenes and I would think, okay, what have I not done? Is this funny enough? Can I funny it up some more? And I just tried to turn it up to, like they say in Spinal Tap, turn it up to 11 and get that out there. So the nervousness part was after I was done and I thought it was funny, showing it to people and seeing if they also thought it was funny. Because I think there's a line about if you write something serious and it's not interesting or it doesn't go over well, it's still serious. But if you write something funny and it's just not funny, it's dead. People are going to completely tune out of that book. They're going to be like, oh. So there's an extra level, I think, of nervousness when you put something before somebody and say, so this is funny. And then there's this onus of people going, oh yeah, prove it. So I have done a lot of live readings of sections of the book, and I've shown it to people who have no emotional investment in my well-being. And they have come back saying it's funny, it's a riot. It's my favorite blurb was from a writer that I know, but I don't know too well, but I had asked her to do a read, and she came back and said it was funny as hell. And I'm like, can I use that? Because I want to use that everywhere. So the answer is, I do believe it's funny. Other people seem to think it's funny. And all I can say is when I was trying to write it, just try to make it as funny as I knew how to make it.
That's great advice. So I need to employ that on my own writing. I was writing a scene, and it was it's more of a serious scene. And I'm like, I need to funny this up because it's getting to the point where it's boring. Right.
Mm-hmm,
and that's where you need to show that, oh no. And so I have to work on my push pull as far as that goes. Cause I think that, the wacky situations, when you can exaggerate and then, it pulls things out. Did you ask I assume they were beta readers. Did you ask them, is this funny particularly? Was that one of the questions you asked them, to look for?
In general, what I do with beta readers is I give them assuming they want it, I give them the whole manuscript and I say, I want your feedback. I try not to prime the pump too much because I'd really rather them come back and tell me the things that specifically stuck out for them. If I think I'm having a problem, like, my main character Star, is she having enough challenges to, we need to give her more with what's called try fail situations, where she tries something and maybe fails at it a couple of times before she succeeds. Like that's sort of mechanical stuff. But so I might ask those kind of things, but only after I've had some original feedback. In general, I try not to ask too many leading questions, because funny should come, I think especially with funny, it should come out of an organic place. And again, you might know somebody who is a comic or who really knows how to write comedy, who can tell you why something works. But for the average reader, I just want them to read it and ask them later, did you laugh? Did it make you chuckle? Are things sticking with you that, you find amusing? So that's kind of what I would do with beta readers.
Do you have a favorite type of beta reader feedback?
Yes,
there's all sorts.
Well, the beta reader who says, this is the best thing I've ever read. Yes, that's my favorite kind of.
Okay. Besides that.
Well, for this book, I actually got a developmental editor, which is something I had not done before, because I was really serious about making this book work. And the toughest part of writing any book, at least for me, and I think this is true for other people, is the soft middle. Beginning, I can dive into that. Ending, well, I kind of know where I'm going. I can wrap this thing up. It'll come. The soft middle, where things have to play out and you've got to really convince people that you've got a story going, that's the tough part. So I brought in a developmental editor, and she was terrific. And the kind of feedback I wanted from her, and I know a developmental editor is different than a beta reader, but for me, she was a beta reader. And she gave me a sense of, this is why this scene works or doesn't work. And here's some suggestions on how you might retry things or rework things. So there's two parts to criticism, in my opinion. It's, what about it is working? What about it is flowing? What about it is serving the book? And the other part is what isn't, and maybe how I might fix it. Now, the I might fix it part is not something that I want to use as a literal template, like, oh, she says to do this, I will do that. But it gives me an idea of it's sort of like a mini brainstorming session for me. It helps me bounce off and think, oh, well, you're right. I don't have to have a date scene here. I could have them get together in another place, or it just gives me more things to think about. So to me, the best kind of criticism helps guide me toward the solution, doesn't provide the solution. There's a great quote from Neil Gaiman, and I'm just going to read it to you real quick because I have it here on my wall. He says that, remember, when people tell you something's wrong or doesn't work for them, they're almost always right. When they tell you exactly what they think is wrong and how to fix it, they're almost always wrong. So that has really given me a good balance in terms of being able to interpret criticism, because one of the reasons I'm publishing this book later in life, shall we say, is that I didn't take criticism. I didn't understand how to absorb it. I felt like I had written these pristine wonders, and somebody would tell me maybe I spelled something wrong, but the idea that there were structural issues or the characters weren't working, I'm like, how dare you? And I grew up, and I finally feel like I have a better grip on accepting criticism.
Accepting criticism is never easy, but we do learn to appreciate it. And I think we can also learn how to offer it constructively. So, yes. Some people need to take a class on how to be constructive with their criticism.
Yeah. I've been in writers groups, and the idea that has stuck with me, and I think this is used in a lot of places, is they call it the sandwich a technique, where you have, tell me something that works, then in the middle of the meat of the sandwich is the things that are maybe problematic, and then round it off with, but I think that you could do this, or this. That sandwich, I think, is something that's much more palatable than if somebody just hits you with 10 things that are wrong.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm a Toastmaster junkie. We have a million ways to offer polite critiques. So, one of my favorite is like, of course, this is with speaking out loud, but you have your eyes, ears, and emotions. So you have your EEE, or you do 3, 2, 1, like 3 good things, 2 things that could be worked on, and 1 thing you did best.
That's good too. That's good too.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Well, Randee Dawn, how could people find out more about Tune In Tomorrow? How can they find out more about you?
Well, first of all, I have my own website. So this is a good place to start. It's randeedawn.com, and Randee is spelled with 2 E's. So Randee, Dawn, DAWN.com. But if all you can remember is the title of the book, if you go to tuneintomorrow.com, that'll take you to a page that will tell you all about the book and links where you can buy it, and blurbs and all sorts of links to press and everything. So either randeedawn.com or tuneintomorrow.com will take you where you need to go.
Randee, are you ready to switch to our rapid fire questions?
Yes. Okay, go ahead. I'm primed.
Tell me about your last car trip.
Oh, my last car trip. Let's see. Okay, the last car trip was actually to Paramus, New Jersey, where I went to do a reading at a Barnes & Noble for Tune In Tomorrow. But that's less of a trip than just I was in the car. I was in a car while I was in Amsterdam recently. We took a car around Amsterdam and also in Belgium. My husband and I drove. We didn't drive so much. We actually were driven in a taxi. So those were really our last car trips, but it was a great trip, and I loved being in the Netherlands and in Belgium. It was just beautiful, beautiful places.
I agree. I have been there as well. What do you have that's a wish for today?
Oh, the big wish for today is that Tune In Tomorrow hits the #1 New York Times bestseller list. I hate to be so single-minded, but it's an all-encompassing experience with releasing a book. In a more realistic sense, I just hope a wish for today is that somebody tells me that they enjoyed the book, or that it really did something for them. Yesterday, my nephew was over with my sister-in-law, and he's 26. He asked if he could read the book. I'm like, sure, here's a copy of the book, take a look, figuring he'll take it home. He'll get back to me in a couple of months. He read it in 24 hours. And I'm thinking, that's the best compliment I could get. That's amazing. So yes, for somebody to have come forward and say, I just swallowed this book whole and loved it. That's probably my real wish for today.
All right. I'm going to steal that line, swallowed it whole and loved it. All right. Final question. What was your high school mascot?
Okay. My high school mascot was the Trojan, as in like the Trojan horse. But you can maybe imagine that there were a lot of salacious jokes that high schoolers might make about that. So yeah, Gaithersburg High School Trojans.
Randee Dawn, thank you so much for stopping by.
Oh, you're welcome. And thank you so much for having me here.
You have been listening to another edition of the Florida Writer Podcast with your host, Alison Nissen. Alison out. Woo, we're all done.
Cool. Thank you so much. That was a lot of fun. I hope it works for you.
Randee Dawn is a Brooklyn-based author and journalist focusing on speculative fiction across the categories, science fiction, fantasy, and horror. She also writes entertainment and lifestyle stories for publications including Today.com, NBC, News.com, Variety, the Los Angeles Times, and Emmy Magazine. She spent time writing for Soap Opera Digest and the Boston Phoenix, E! Online, New Musical Express, and Mojo. For more information, visit randeedawn.com. Join the Florida Writers Association for a weekend jam-packed with networking opportunities, workshops, awards, book signings, and a youth summit with lots more. For more information, visit floridawriters.org. Until next time.